All right, this is Brian Levy and Rhonda Coons, and we're back to discuss the third principle in our Agile Portfolio Management approach. And that third principle is outcome-based breakdown structure. So let's start off just by discussing what an outcome-based breakdown structure is. And in order to do that, let's start off with looking at a greater outcome. So we start at the high level, and what we do is we take this higher level outcome and we decompose it into smaller and smaller pieces. And when you're doing that, that is the creation of an outcome-based work breakdown structure. Now, when we do this, this differs from what current practice is. The current practice, people do a work breakdown structure, and they'll take a higher level piece of work and break that down into smaller and smaller pieces. But we don't want to focus on the work itself. We want to focus on the outcomes, the results that we want to achieve. And that's why we're suggesting that you should actually have an outcome-based breakdown structure. And Rhonda, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so a couple things that you mentioned. One is, again, this outcome-based breakdown structure starts at the top. So you look at your strategy, you understand, come up with the set of goals that are needed for that strategy, and then decide what outcomes are needed. And so then you start breaking down the outcomes through the hierarchy. And so if you're looking at a sub outcome, the sum of the sub outcomes when added up should give you the greater outcome, or else you're incomplete and you need to go back into the drawing board and rethink those set of sub outcomes again. You need to make sure that every sub layer adds up to the greater layer to give you the outcomes you desired. And thinking back to our last video that we did, again, outcomes are about getting effectiveness. And so this structure from top to bottom through the organization, again, gets the whole organization aligned on the effectiveness needed by getting the desired outcomes through the structure.
Yeah, it's super important that this is done because, especially when you're in an agile environment, one thing we pride ourselves on in agile is the ability to adapt, the ability to change. And you want to look at the outcomes themselves and say, are we getting closer? And if we're not, then let's change. Let's do something different. And so by having this outcome based breakdown structure, what it allows you to do is to ship off pieces of the outcomes to different people, to different teams, to delegate that work out, to decentralize it. And this allows for multiple groups to be able to focus on it simultaneously. We're all working on different pieces. And again, as long as you have the relationship where those pieces add up to the greater whole, then you'll actually direct the organization toward achieving the outcomes in the most agile way possible.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there about alignment, Brian, is that basically all that work should be aligned to achieving the outcome that you're focused on. And if you're working on something and you can't see that alignment, or you ask yourself, is this work going to contribute towards achieving that outcome? If the answer is no, you have to ask yourself and ask the team, why are we doing it? Is it waste? Should we be focusing on something else?
And it's an excellent point, and it happens over and over in the organizations that we work with. When we put the outcome-based breakdown structure in front of them, and they're faced with looking at it and checking to see, are their actions aligned to it? Their actions speak for themselves. They automatically drift toward doing the right things. And so when you're defining this outcome-based structure, what you want to do is make sure that you're also defining the metrics that go along with it. How are you measuring it, right? What does it look like to achieve this outcome? what are the essential characteristics that are externally visible from the outside that let you know that this outcome has been achieved? And as long as I can take those characteristics and quantify them, I can start developing metrics, and then I can start measuring to see, well, how close am I toward receiving the outcome that I want? Additionally, into the metrics, I also want to set targets. So now that I've quantified it, I want to be able to say, hey, here's the goal that we want to reach by this time frame for this outcome, and then I can check to see, did we actually reach it? And if we've reached it, then everything's great. But if we haven't, then we want to actually think about changing some of the actions, changing the outputs we're producing, changing the activities that we're actually doing to make sure we actually focus on the outcome in the end. The last thing I wanted to say about this is about thresholds, because at some point you're going to have to make some decisions. Should you actually achieve this outcome? Should I actually change my strategy? And when I'm looking at those things, I want to have these thresholds for analysis that actually tell me if I reach this number at this time, then it means X. And I want to have it spelled out to say, I'll make this decision. And if I do this in advance, then when I actually reach that point and get that number, I'm more likely to be unbiased. I won't suffer from things like confirmation bias, and I can make more objective decisions that really help the organization to go forward. But what are your thoughts, Rhonda?
Yeah, so basically what you're talking about and describing are the feedback loops. Is what is that feedback? What is that data coming back in, and what is that data telling us? Are we moving the needle in the right direction? Are we getting the expected outcomes based on the activity that we planned? And the great thing about Scrum at Scale is that it supports these concepts very cleanly, as you're showing across the top there, where you're looking at the higher level outcomes, the strategic outcomes, and it aligns to your EMS. You have a chief product owner role, and they've got a set of outcomes from the decomposition of the outcomes that they're focused on, and they will be looking at the data and the feedback loop coming in from the metrics at their level. And then finally, you have down at the team level, you have your product owner, again, focused on outcomes, looking at the metrics, looking at the data. Has the needle moved in the right direction? And if yes, maybe you keep going. And if the answer is no, then there probably needs to be a pivot. But again, it's creating that feedback loop and creating those roles who are really managing and looking at this information and making those decisions.
The key to actually making this all work is you starting off with decomposition. So I'm taking the higher level outcome, I'm decomposing it. I'm asking the question, is there a piece of this that I can do independently that will contribute toward the greater outcome, right? And once I can decompose one piece, then I can use horizontal analysis, and I can start looking and asking the questions of, well, if I do this piece, do I achieve all of the higher level outcome, or are there other pieces that I need to actually do? Are there other outcomes that need to be attained? And so I keep asking that question until I reach the point in which the sum of the decomposed outcomes equal up to the higher level outcome parent. And as long as I actually do that analysis and I reach that relationship, I'll know that I have everything covered.
Right. One question I hear a lot, Brian, is about the relationship, the one to many, many to many relationship here. And what I mean by that is I'll get the question that says, hey, I have a set of work defined. Is it okay if it's tied to many outcomes? And the answer is yes. We see that all the time, where there's actually a set of work happening that could be moving the needle and helping to achieve many different outcomes, not just one. And so often there's a many to many relationship between outcomes and outputs, the work being delivered. And that's not a bad thing. That's very common. And in fact, if you have that type of work that's moving the needle on multiple outcomes, that might be something you want to double down on, because maybe you're actually getting more out of that work than you would something else. And so maybe you want to do more of that thing if it really is helping to achieve multiple things at the same time.
Absolutely. And this is where the role of the chief product owner is so important, because they should be doing that type of analysis inside of the Metascrum, figuring that out and encapsulating that into their prioritization, right? So, hey, I see something that's giving me more value, then I should actually double down. I should do more of that and do it faster so we can actually extract that value.
Yep, absolutely.
So I think that about ends our session today on the outcome based breakdown structure. And so we'll end the video here, and we will pick this up again with another installment very shortly.